Welcome to the wrap party, everybody. I'm Peter Hunner, co-founder of VeryBusy. And today we are with Dylan Nelson. Dylan Nelson is a photographer out of New York. He's a dear friend of mine. We've known each other for quite some time now. Dylan, do you want to give a little blurb about yourself? What you've been up to? How's it out
Yeah,
there on the East Coast today?
sure. I mean, I think, yeah, I am based in New York. Originally, I grew up in the Midwest, which is actually how Peter and I met, and in Minneapolis. And yeah, I'm out in New York City. I'm doing a variety of different kinds of projects, keeping me busy. Yeah, and
Thank you.
day to
I,
day, day by day.
I do want to share a quick story about how you and I met because I think
Yeah,
it's really cool. It's a cool brag story. It was probably what 2015, 16. I don't
six.
know.
I think
It was a while
probably
ago.
early 2016. Yeah,
But my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were eating at a bar. We're up at a bar, like a Japanese place, and at the time I had this Leica MD. Here it is. I
yeah,
had to take it down the shelf because I haven't shot with it in a while. And I
yeah,
had it sitting there on the bar, and this guy walks up. Dylan walks up, and he's picking up some food at the bar. And you're like, oh yeah, it's a nice camera. Is that a Leica?
yeah.
And we got to talking about the camera that he saw, and then just at the time I was working as a retoucher digital tech. You were shooting, you were teching retouching back then too, and yeah, opened up this conversation to a good friendship and a working relationship and everything else. So all over a Leica, which I think is pretty cool.
I love that story actually. I think very fondly on that because it really goes to show you just what a meandering path this
Mm-hmm.
industry, or really any of these kinds of industries, particularly ones where you're, self-employed, what a meandering and serendipitous path it really is. I think
Oh yeah.
a lot of times when people talk about their career, especially people that are, far more seasoned than I am, they can talk about the past in a really straight line, and they leave
Yeah.
out all the parts where it was bad, or all the parts where they didn't know what they were doing, or whatever. And it's kind of like that moment where it's like, yeah, you walk into a restaurant and you meet a person that you end up being a groom, like, I was a groomsman, right, in
Heck yeah.
your wedding, or I was an usher in your
For
wedding.
sure.
And it's like, that's the magic of life, right? And also speaks to the serendipity of the career. Yeah,
Oh, totally. I think it's a nice story to kick off our conversation of today too. You know, an overall this topic of talking about lately this perhaps the kind of the state of our industry and how we're kind of viewing things as technology is evolving, as workforces are changing, as we are trying to navigate how to as creative professionals stay relevant, and keep getting work, keep getting clients.
yeah,
You know, I think as an overall way to jump into this, I, there was some people talking. I kind of surfed through the Facebook groups like New York Image Makers Group and stuff like that, and or Rob Haggard's post on a photo editor, and looking at the comments of people, and there seems to be like a lot of people that they're having a harder time lately. It seems like the industry may be in a lull in certain areas. People are looking for work. There's overall people that aren't sure about AI and technology and what's going to happen in that kind of field. Um, I think there's, I'd love to get your opinion just overall. And as a working photographer in New York, you're constantly selling yourself and trying to figure out how to get those next clients and keep clients.
yeah.
What's kind of this last year or two been like for you? Have you noticed any shifts in agency work, creative work, or just the way people are working and obtaining work?
Yeah, I think there's a couple components to that, right? And I think the first thing to preface is that in the grand scheme of career paths, I think in many ways I'm very early on. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in a long term, in terms of like when I started as a photo assistant to now, yeah, it's been a long time. But kind of in every time you move to a new market, and I moved to New York 3 years ago, nearly, you're restarting. And so I think you're always trying to get a lay of the land. Like, okay, who are the, where can I fit in? What kind of rooms can I get into to shoot? What are my skill sets and how do I set myself apart? Which I think that's going to be a recurring theme, I'm guessing, for this conversation. But
Yeah.
um, and then I think the other component is that we are so interconnected. When you think about technology, you have to also think about communication. It used to be, not even that long ago, if you were curious about what was going on in your town or your city, you would talk about it on set, and that's all you kind of knew. Now there are Facebook groups, there are Instagram, Instagram accounts. There are just whole conversations that will unfold in the comments of an Under Armour image or something like that. Like there will be just certain spaces where you might gain true insight into what the temperature is and what the weather is for the industry. But you also might be participating in something that isn't totally constructive, And I
Oh, yeah.
think, like, so to speak objectively, and I think it's inherent that this is obviously all my own perspective, but
Yep.
I do see that you're seeing different sizes of agencies popping up. Like in my experience, it's not. I'm getting a lot of companies or agencies that reach out, and they're smaller. They're like boutique, and maybe that's a team of 8 people, and then they have a lot of freelancers or whatever, and they're often working with startup companies, and there's I've that's been a lot of my and then you have like the big companies like the Targets, the Best Buys, the whatever, those kind of bigger
Yeah.
corporations that have strong, stable bases. They kind of understand their general volume, and you can, depending on what market you're in, you can kind of figure out where to fit in within some of those if you're lucky. Um, so you kind of have these bigger players, and then you have what I'm seeing is more and more of these boutique agencies where maybe a lot of times, yeah, you're working with startups. So it's a different kind of conversation, especially about like the budget, usage,
Mm-hmm.
conversations around education, and like educating the client, educating yourself on the product, and how to have a conversation with, like, how do you
Yeah.
present yourself as like, hey, I'm the best option for what you're doing, and I think that this is going to be a great thing for me in my book.
Yeah. You're talking about smaller agencies and smaller creative teams and more, I think coming out of COVID, I think a lot of companies, agencies, a lot of these people, they pivoted to, well, number one, remote work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also kind of cut overhead. Heaven forbid something like this happens again. How are we going to survive it?
Yeah.
We got to be light. We got to be nimble. Outsourcing our creative. All those kinds of stuff. So it's interesting to hear you talk about it in that way, and then also attached to the budget side of it, where if you can see some shifts, from a post production standpoint, we've experienced the same thing and observed a very similar thing. But it's and when thinking about it though, like dealing with these kind of clients who are maybe they're smaller, littler budgets, maybe they're newer to their own client,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they haven't been working with them that long, and it's a new process for them too.
Yeah.
Getting in a mindset of how to approach, whether it be an estimate or just an outreach or anything like that. Do you have, like, when you're talking to a certain client, is there certain ways you are presenting yourself, like via a small agency or maybe a larger, more corporate Fortune 500 like company asking for a bid or something like that?
Yeah. I think I think like the first question, if you get that cold email, which you're, hey, amazing, you got to ask yourself, how badly do I want to do it? Right. And then I think if you've never heard of the company, or maybe you know the size of its footprint, it's not like, a household name. Right. I think the best approach that I've experienced is just to flat out ask, how much money do you really have in the budget? And where, I think like the baseline questions, and it's really, I came from the background of being a tech, right? So if you were to put me on hold as a tech, I would say, what gear do you need, who's the photographer, and then let me provide you an estimate, because it's like, I don't want to just show up and then have you be like, oh, well, you didn't bring this and we've only got, a couple $100 and it's actually a 2-week job. You're like,
Yeah.
what? Like, you gotta understand that, especially when you're working with a small business, they, and let's say maybe they have some startup capital, maybe they're getting funded, maybe they don't. When you're a small company, it doesn't matter whether you're buying a computer for the office or paying a photographer. You feel like you are giving that person, that vendor, your own money. Do you know what I mean? Whereas
Oh
if you're
yeah.
with I don't know, FedEx, and you're a senior creative or whatever, let's just say whatever Fortune 100 company you want to think of, you just know you've got money to work with, and you don't think about it from such a personal perspective.
Hmm.
And I think when you're dealing with smaller agencies and when you're dealing with the smaller clients, they're looking at money and they're really thinking like, well, I've got to make payroll for my team. And I've got to, and I've got all, and do you need to be totally sympathetic to that? No, but you need to understand that that's how they're looking. You have to have
That's where
some
they're
of that
coming from.
empathy
Yeah.
and say, oh, these are the facts. So I always just say like, well, what do you really have in the budget? And then you got to ask yourself, well, how badly do I still want to do this? If it's not whatever, if you're not going to get to eat
Yeah.
caviar at lunch, okay, well, here are the ways that we can approach this. And these are the stakeholders that I can pull together to make a real crew, And then,
Mhm.
so for me, like my hard line is I can, and the other part, and this is part of the broader conversation that you see on Instagram and you see on some of these posts, is like, well, are we creating a race to the bottom if you're always willing to work for less, or if you're willing to do this for that? And that is a big and important conversation to have. Um, and that's why it always comes back to like, well, how badly do you want to do the job? And is this job going to help you stand out for your book? Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this race to the bottom. I mean, that's always been around.
Yeah.
There's always going to be people that'll do it cheaper than you would, or they'll do
Sure.
more for the same money.
Yeah.
And kind of divulging back into the conversations that you may see on social media or other places
Hmm.
of this. I think like you kind of mentioned before, you can get sucked into kind of this echo chamber at times, because there, even if an industry, or even if the industry now seems like it's maybe in an overall lull, there's still places that are doing lots of work, good paying work. There's always going to be that around too. And I think how a specific creative is positioned, their clientele, the kind of clients they hold, will play a big role in how they feel, their sentiment about the actual market.
Yeah.
If your client base is all large companies and they're in the beauty and lifestyle, you know, area through COVID, you're probably looking at work a lot different than, if you were working on film sets
Yeah.
and doing stuff like that. So, yeah, but the overall shift, I think that kind of combined with, the do more faster for less kind of this attitude, which is a real thing. I think that's just how our markets work. Like they're always going to want more with better technology and
Yeah.
cheaper.
And
I,
yeah, I, I think, I think that there isn't really, it's all going to come back to a gut check of where you want to be within that body of work, right? Sometimes, like if it's a really small project and I just think I'm really excited about it.
yeah,
Um, well, then the way I look at it is like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to make a lot of money, but I'm going to do it my way, because I'm not going to, like, this is my opportunity to show what my differentiating factor is. And then I have to look at it as like, okay, if I were to do a test, or if I were to even shoot a lot of editorial work, which I think, this isn't really necessarily spoken about so transparently, but a lot of editorial at this point is not a great way to make a living. And a lot of times when you
yeah,
look at the cover of magazines, those photographers and stylists that are working on that stuff, they're paying out of their own pocket to get it to look that good because they know that that's going to get them more better paying work potentially,
Yeah.
right?
It's for the
So,
portfolio. Yeah.
yeah. So, okay, that's editorial. If you're looking at maybe just a smaller company that's a startup and maybe they won't be around in 3 years, maybe they will be, then I think it's like, in a way, it's not to say that it's editorial. It's not. They're paying real money and you want them to understand. And it's a great learning experience for them to understand what the costs, what the hard costs of production are.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of exposure, this is an opportunity of exposure. If I just do a test by myself and I put it on my Instagram, only the people that follow me on Instagram are going to see that thing. If I shoot a campaign, I get to, maybe this is an opportunity for me to get to reach out to a stylist that I've always wanted to work with,
Yeah.
right? And that gets a conversation going with that person. And I get to see what working with them is really like. And
Mm-hmm.
that company has 150,000 followers or whatever.
Yeah.
Then I'm in front of more eyeballs. And they're not hard costs. They're kind of, they're sort of like, the, not to call them intangibles because they're all trackable, but they're like, those are the other benefits that you have to weigh
Mm-hmm.
out.
But I think that's such a hard thing to gauge too, but it's so relevant that it kind of comes back to the story of how you and I met, just these genuine connections and meetings and by chance happenings that you can put into effect, by going out there and presenting yourself and just, grinding, as you want to say. But,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, but you can work as hard as you want in industry, you can be the most talented one out there, but like luck and opportunity chance are still going to play a role in your career. Like being at the right place at the right time. You can do everything perfect, but like luck and chance are still going to have a role in a kind of job you get or what happens.
Yeah. And I think,
um
yeah, absolutely. And I think, luck, who was it? I think it's Robert Redford, or I believe it was Robert Redford that said luck is knowing opportunity when you see it.
mm-hmm.
And I think the other part with talent is that hard work beats talent every single time.
Yeah,
Every single time.
that's a good
And,
one.
as you get to be, let's say you finish high school, you were really great in art class, you loved photo, whatever, you decide to go to art school for college, whatever. In those early years of you trying to figure that out and your own sense of self and where you think you're going to fit into this broader world that's actually really radically changing as you're going through school and is totally different by the time you come out. You get to
Yeah.
your 30s and you're starting to feel a little differently about just having talent. You're understanding like, oh, okay, there are more players to this game, and I can sit at home and get mad about who isn't better or whatever, or I can go to the studio and shoot something,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like emulation or replication is not always the path to success either. Just because you can make an identical picture that looks just like that photo in whatever
Yeah.
campaign, okay, that's cool, but that doesn't always result in anything. And that's what those kind of like the ambiguity of the industry sometimes, which does feel
Mm-hmm.
like this, like, oh, salt over the shoulder, like, yes, it is luck and whatever, but it is also it is a game of attrition, unfortunately, right? I remember when I was finishing college, I had a great professor, which it took me a long time to realize that they were great. I looked back on all my interactions and was like, oh, that was a real mentor, whether I was in the headspace or not. And I remember she said, 85% of you are no longer going to be artists in 5 years or whatever it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, that's great news for the ones that are going to still be artists. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's kind of it's kind of true. It's like you do have to weather the storm, and you have to. Yeah, I was just listening to a great interview with Mick Jagger. The Rolling Stones just came out with a new album, whether you like them or not, whatever. But he talks about how you just have to stay relevant. If you look at any industry, whether I mean for the most part, specifically media, that's an easy conversation. You look at the film industry, music industry, TV, whatever. We've all gone through these states of change, and they're kind of go through these cycles where things become more accessible, they become more affordable, and then all of a sudden, not only is the audience broadened, but the creators are broadened. If when we were kids, that was when like mini DV tape and the iMac came
Oh,
out, right? And that created incredible access to people, right? And it
yeah.
actually
Hmm.
changed the direction of an entire medium, for
Totally.
documentary film, for small scale filmmaking. Like all of a sudden, you could kind of make a movie. It's not going to be Star Wars, but it's like, you can make something.
Yeah.
And I think similarly, photography, lens based imagery, period, it's really the youngest medium. And now we've seen so many states of change. 2006 really was like the transition from film to digital. And a lot of jobs changed, and then
Yep.
the way that we consumed media kind of sped up a bit. Then 2007, the iPhone came out. That we were trying to figure that out. We're figuring out what smartphones really are, whatever, whatever. And now we're in a place where like the access to photography is totally different. So it's a leveled playing field. You know, how do you stand out in that?
Yeah, I mean, like, how do you adapt to these changes? I feel like right now a lot of people think AI and that kind of technology is this next wave that
Hmm.
could change the landscape. Who
Hmm.
knows what's really going to happen? They said that about digital photography and jobs. I mean, I think these things come, they get really hyped up, and then once you really see the kind of these trends and fads, once they really start to settle in, you find they're more. I mean, the big ones will make a huge difference. Like the iPhone
Yeah,
changed
yeah,
access like dramatically. I mean, heck, there's movies shot on iPhones now,
yeah.
which is amazing.
But
Um,
yeah, I'm sorry. Please.
no, no, but
Well,
in terms of you mentioned staying relevant,
yeah.
and I've also heard as reinventing yourself, and
Mhm.
I've you hear about this talks in photographers and how they need to adjust their style, time to time or this or that, to stay relevant and maintain clients, to stay in vogue, and all these different things. You know, how do you? I mean, from your perspective as a photographer, when you think about trying to reinvent yourself or stay relevant, or I mean, maybe that doesn't mean reinventing yourself, but maybe this
Mhm.
is being up to date on what's going on or
Yeah.
knowing the right people or this or that. I guess that overall thought of staying relevant, what does that mean to you in like a photography sense?
Yeah. I mean, okay. So it's, I think that with most any career, if you want to have a lifelong career, you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be open to education, which means you have to, um, that starts by looking at yourself and saying, okay, it's good for me to be confident. I should be confident. I should have a good sense of self and a good sense of what my skill sets are. But I also, when I think about that ego, I have to give an honest assessment of what my strengths are now. If I'm not giving an honest assessment of my ego and sense of self, then I'm kind of just, what's the term? I'm just sort of being, boastful and braggadocious, but not necessarily backing that up. It's like it's a fine line.
Yeah,
You
and
gotta
it's
you
not going to
gotta
help
look
you
at
at all.
yourself and say these are my strong suits, but then also be able to say, well, where do I need to improve? And
Yeah.
then, and the other big thing, and there are many facets to running these kinds of businesses that are areas of improvement and efficiency and whatever. You also need to acknowledge that you will not get everything on your to-do list done. It will not happen. You know, like That's
Yeah.
okay. Start with that. And now, what are the priorities? For me, I think it's actually trying to figure out, well, what is my voice? Again, I mentioned like you can copy whatever that new thing is,
Mhm.
but it's kind of like um, looking at current trends is sort of like looking at the stars. It's like they're X number of light years away. They might not actually still be illuminated, but you can see them, you know?
Hmm.
And it's sort of
That's
like,
good.
well, whatever is happening right now, like, yeah, that's happening right now. But by the time you might be doing that, let's say you change your career path based around whatever the current thing is. Oh, I do slow motion splashes of popsicles. Okay, cool. You finally land that startup popsicle company and you spent whatever, amazing. You pivoted. But by the time you're doing that, you're maybe like the last guy still doing it or whatever.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, but and you can make another comparison of like to copy work, it's like if you're an amazing guitarist and you want to be a successful musician, you're not going to sit there and learn Jimi Hendrix solos note for note. Like amazing, but I'm pretty sure when Jimi Hendrix was playing it, he wasn't writing it down ahead of time. And it's like it's sort of like not to say like I'm like that. I'm not Jimi Hendrix. But it's just to say within whatever that craft is, you need to find your voice. You need to have some spaces that maybe aren't totally connected to what's happening right now.
Hmm.
And actually, it's like if you think about where creative inputs come from for art directors, creative directors, there are broader trends. And sure, you can think about the lens based ones. And so we can talk about movies, right? We could talk about maybe
Hmm.
like contemporary books. You could say if you wanted to stay in commercial photography, let's say I'm a still life photographer, maybe you want to see what's happening in Europe.
Yeah.
Maybe you actually need to kind of like break up some of the things you do to give yourself some fresh perspective. Maybe just look at painting for a while if you want to look at real
Totally.
images. Go to a museum. Go. You kind of we create our paths. We're all creatures of habit, and especially when it comes to if you're trying to stay busy, you'll have certain talents. Maybe you're good. Like for me, I find a lot of times I've shoot more and more. I've gotten an opportunity to shoot some food. Okay,
Hmm.
well, I didn't set out to do that, but if that's something that's happening and I'm getting that
Yeah.
opportunity, like okay, I'm going to pay attention to that. I'm going to look at what's going on in food, but I'm also going to think about well, what's happened historically and how do you expound upon that? I think when I think about staying relevant, I think you do need to have an awareness of current trends. You also need to have an honest assessment of what your skill sets are and what you're willing to do to change, right? And then you need
Hmm.
to keep asking yourself, what's my differentiating factor? And a lot of times those don't always come down just to um, they don't always come down just to like the images you make. It might just be the soft skills as well. And I think
Yeah.
there is something to be said for being steadfast, for having sticking to your own vision and saying, look, I know that's really cool that that's the trend, but I'm gonna double down on what I'm doing. I think
Hmm.
if it's not working, then yeah, you need to ask yourself, oh, maybe I need to change it up. But
Yeah, I love how you meant how you're talking about this because it just reminds me of like when I was years ago when I was teching and working for some larger companies here in town who would bring in out of town photographers to shoot campaigns and all this kinds of stuff. I had like the pleasure of working. I see your light going on and off.
yeah, I had some technical difficulties. Sorry.
But you can fix it. Actually, it's kind of nice and moody with the light off.
That might be where we're headed.
There you go.
Oh man. All right. I'm just gonna unplug it. Can you still see me
There
all
you
right?
go. Yeah, you look great.
Okay.
But I had the pleasure of working with some wonderful like photographers who were at the time like top of of where they were placement wise in terms of photography, whether it be food, interiors, lifestyle, stuff like that. And it always amazed me meeting these photographers who a lot of them were they're little bit older. They've been in their career while they're established. They're known for certain things. But, within their work, their self-being, like their personality, the way they were living life, like you could see that in their photography, like their photography was an actual kind of extension of who they are, even though it's a room set, even though it's shooting product. Like it's amazing to see, talking about looking for inspiration beyond the lens and beyond something like this. But like the one that comes to mind, and a good friend of mine, Bill Phelps, who he's just like a man of the world. He loves to travel. He's into motorcycles and all kinds of art, and that all that funnels his creative process, and it all funnels his photography,
Yeah. And
and finding inspiration and learning about yourself and developing, and then your art is a reflection of that, whether it be commercial or fine art or whatever you're doing, it makes its way into that vision, and I like how you were talking about that in terms of, you know, if you want to stay relevant, you got to be true to yourself and what you're doing, but also, be open to that. You know, you don't always have to do what's hot right now. You'll find that if you can find yourself and your interest in who you are, and start funneling stuff like that.
yeah, I think that that's actually, you bring up a great point. I loved being a tech because I loved working with different people and
Mm-hmm.
seeing like how they work, how they carry themselves. And you would meet really seasoned people within this industry, and maybe maybe I don't want to make those kinds of pictures. It's not always about you. Like my favorite part about being the tech is like, and we were chatting about this the other day, like it is a customer service role, right? It is like a service level component where I'm there to support the photographer, and that means I kind of have to learn a few things about them and their temperament, and then you've got this client there. It's a great way to understand what's going on and be a bit of a fly on the wall. And I would meet some really really wonderfully talented people, and you can't really put a price on some of the things that you can take away from those
Yeah.
experiences. And it's not hard skills, it's soft skills, and they aren't even, they're not always like it's not even like knowledge that you'll even necessarily know you're picking up. um,
Mm-hmm.
Bill Phelps, who, if you're listening to this, you should look up his work.
Oh yeah.
And I think if you look at his work, he's not picking a trend. That is a person who is steadfast and possessed in what he does. And you go to him because he has a vision. And maybe he'll make a picture for you that's going to be in, I know he shoots a lot in black and white. Sometimes he'll use alternative processes or whatever, but he's going to, he'll execute what you need, but he's going to do it with his voice. And that's not, that's, to be clear, that's rarefied air.
Yeah.
That is not,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's on the topic of this too, though. It's like I thinking about coming out of art school and coming out of college. You know, as creatives, I feel we can tie our self-worth to our work so much. Like, you know, how we do creatively or creatively within business is like a reflection of how we're doing in life, essentially. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
so like, if we're not making the work we want to make, if we're not getting work at all, then everything else, it's a lot of talk about work-life balance and figuring that out in conjunction to have a hopefully a long career. But when watching some of these other professionals and other photographers, and some that would come in and they've been photographing for 30 years, they've been on the top of their game for a long time, and you meet them and you realize photography is not like they're like they're more passionate about architecture,
Hmm.
and their family is their number one thing, and
Hmm.
going to their kids, like it's a humbling and refreshing view when you're young, when I was young, and like full headed like photography, and I'm going to do this and this, and I have and it was like consuming me, right?
Yeah.
um and to see somebody who is so talented and so open and is doing beautiful work and has had a good career, mind you, I haven't seen some of the behind the scenes and what all got everything else going on, but just from an overall appearance. But like being with them on set for a week,
Mhm.
understanding that like we're not talking about photography. Yeah, we're shooting. That's what we're doing for work today, but we're talking about everything else in the world. Like it's. And then you meet some people who all they want to talk about is cameras. All they want to talk about is this. And
Yeah.
great. Okay, maybe that's them too. Um, but
Well,
I thought it was such a humbling experience, just realizing that what you do, and creatively too. If you're a creative person, and this kind of I'm leading into another topic I want to get into next, which is social media. I think
sure.
maybe you could see that,
Yeah.
but not it could be your passion in life, and you can find value in that, but understanding that it's not a sole reflection on who you are as a person,
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
how your life is going and stuff like this. Um,
Well,
and kind of laying into this when we talk about finding inspiration and staying relevant. Social media is such a huge thing that everybody's like, you got to be on social media, you got to be on Instagram, you got to be on this. If you're a photographer or a creative, you need to get your work out there to get discovered. And I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword there. It's like, okay, I'm going to spend time on social media putting my stuff out there, but I'm also going to consume, right? I'm going to
yeah.
go look at other things, but how is that going to affect me? And I think, there's a huge effect on this. We've talked about it a bit off the bat, I guess. What is your, I guess, kind of introductory overall view into social media? How are you using it, either personally or with like your photography career?
Well, I would say there is room for improvement for how I use it for my career and in my business side of it. Instagram specifically, I've never been on Twitter, or like, I mean, I've been on Twitter, but I don't post or participate in a lot of these social networks. I think it really, again, depends on the structure of your business and the kind of clients you have. But I also think that you have to understand that, like, it is a consumer facing application. And even if you're going there to use it for business, you might get sucked in just as a consumer. And
They're built to do that. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's really easy for me, and I think just for people in general, to step into a headspace of productive procrastination, of like, I'm looking at what's going on in the market, and I'm looking at who's posting this, and this is what the visual trend is now. And it's like, okay, what else are you doing today? And I think, like, I do think that Instagram is a place for real conversations that are happening within the industry. I think it's an opportunity that you can meet people to make work. I think it's a great way to see, like, what I love is when you follow some photographers and they post and they say, like, this was the art director, this was the stylist, this was the, where you're sharing like who the stakeholders were into making something.
Hmm.
That's an amazing educational opportunity, because you can actually say, like, oh, okay, well, I love that stylist. What else? What else did they work on? I mean, and which actually, like, if for a music thing, it's sort of like you listen to music and you're like, well, who produced the album? What
Yeah.
other bands did they work with? Oh, all of my favorite albums from those bands were produced by that producer. I guess I just like, and it kind of can send you down a rabbit hole where you can learn a lot about what's going on. Um, but it's hard to, for me, I struggle with maintaining using it as a tool that helps me, and a lot
Yeah.
of times I feel like the tool is using me, where I'm just kind of like, you don't always come away from that app feeling like, great. Sometimes you're
Hmm.
like, oh, everybody else is busy and I'm not busy. Or um, you think you're learning about what the market trends are, or what's going on. I think that part of those apps and social media is something you need to really keep yourself honest about and give yourself some structure to, because I think it's really easy to get sucked into it.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think in the future, this is a thing where there's going to be like psychology around. Like I think there already is, but with the algorithms and how these things happen, if like you said, people are posting success stories. They're not going
Mhm.
to typically post that they're not working today, or they lost a client, which, I think is the reality of a lot of what goes on behind the scroll, essentially,
Yeah.
um, and kind of tying back to, the self-worth thing and connecting it to your actual creative life or your professional life. It's a hard thing, I think, creatively to separate the business side of things and your personal side of things. And it's when integrating into the social media things, especially if you feel like you need to use it to sell yourself
Mm-hmm.
or you need to be on there to stay relevant or communicate or be part of communities. It's hard not to get sucked in when you have to be on there because you think you're using it, like you said, in like a professional sense or in a work sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I always ask, like, have you ever gotten work off posting on social media?
Again, I think I've probably not gotten direct work off of just something I posted. But again, like thinking about working with a smaller client or whatever, it's like that client, maybe it's an art director or a designer, maybe they share things. And then what I will get is somebody being like, oh, I saw XYZ designer posted your work and they're a friend of mine. They recommended,
Mm-hmm.
that will happen. But as far as like, oh, I posted a photo of a can and now, Coca-Cola reached out. It's like,
Pepsi's calling.
yeah,
Yeah.
not unfortunately, no. But I do think like one of the weird things about commercial photography or still life photography, yeah, still life photography specifically, and it's not so formulaic, but you do have to test. You do have to try new things. You do have to get yourself out there. And there is this, you have to maintain like a really positive attitude of knowing like, well, if I test and I'm like go and toil in this studio and make pictures, like I ultimately, you're not totally willing things into the world, but you are trying to push things in a certain direction to say like, well, this is the kind of stuff I want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I do think that these platforms are important because you can tell people what you do want to do all the time. You can tell people that you're talented, but
Mm.
Instagram and those spaces are an opportunity for you to show people I am doing this. I do have these hard skills. These are things
Yeah.
I really made versus just like you should hire me, I'm really good at it. It's like, okay,
It's like, yeah, you're shooting and showing the work you want to get, essentially.
yeah. And I
That's
think
how you
that,
should get it.
but don't expect, I think that the thing that makes those apps difficult in a headspace is like there are likes and there are too many analytics tied to it,
Yeah.
that make
That
it,
aren't necessarily a good gauge of anything relative to what you may be looking for business wise in
yeah,
some certain,
because
like
it's like,
in a
okay,
small
well,
scale.
yeah, I got a bunch of likes, but I didn't get a job out of it or
Yeah.
whatever. It's like, or maybe you only got a few likes, but you did get a job out of it. So, okay. I think it's like you can't control the outcome, right? That's a common thing I've heard with business in general and creative pursuits particularly. You can't control outcomes. You can control inputs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can get to a place where you can let go of the outcome, Instagram's great. You know, it's a tool. Find a way to
Yeah.
make it still maintain itself as a tool. Make sure that you're still looking at it and that you're not letting it kind of gloss over you.
Yeah. And become relevant.
Yeah.
Um, I also feel, and this day and age, we talk about we earlier we talked about we've seen a bit of a shift for smaller agencies popping up, smaller creative groups, and kind of more limbo, faster paced, maybe lower budget teams and projects that maybe kind of coming out of what maybe the pandemic did and some other financial situations we are in now. But I'm curious to know about like, well, in terms of going about getting work.
Mhm.
Um, we had a conversation earlier in the week about you had a good it's like I think you said like the asshole is dead,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
just the kind of the persona and ideal kind of this what you would see in a creative that may be getting jobs in the presence on set or overall demeanor on set. maybe just set etiquette too, and how people are
Mm-hmm.
brought up in the industry this day and age. Um, do you think, like, people are looking for a different type of photographer than they were, 15, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, comparatively to like the expectations of how they create, how they interact with a client? Um,
Yeah,
any opinions on that?
yeah. I mean, I can't. I wasn't really like super. 20 years ago I was 15, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that what I see now is wanting to have sets that, for me, it's like I want to have a sense of gratitude to have the opportunity to do the job, to make sure that I still see it as an opportunity, and then to try to carry myself and establish a kind of room tone that is one that is open to a bit of feedback, a bit of collaboration, and compromise. And I think that part of that is where I'm at in my career,
Yeah.
and part of that is what's become more acceptable culturally, like set culture, and then also just culturally. I think we were talking about assholes in the sense that we were talking about the, maybe you kind of came up under this too, but it's like some of the people that I first assisted for, they were shouters when it came to education. It was more of a shouting thing and less of like a talking and soft explanation thing.
Yep.
And I think that that's less and less acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of treating people in that way, being, just
Yeah.
having a little too much of a hard edge. And I mentioned before, like there is a conga line of really wonderful people you can work with, and they're all wanting work, and they're all pretty easy to get along with, and they're not going to say anything weird, and and that stuff is how you get jobs, and it's certainly how you keep them, because
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, I think that kind of behavior, being a little too edgy, a little too rough around the edges, is not always like a really becoming thing. I think it's also industry specific, and maybe it's regional
Mm-hmm.
too. Like maybe in the more high fashion, maybe it's a little more, maybe it's like cooler to be a little
Yeah.
removed or whatever. I don't know. I can't really speak to that, but like the kind of jobs that I'm on, people want to enjoy the work. It's like, hey, we're all here for 10 plus hours, ideally for multiple days this week.
Mm-hmm.
I am sharing moments of my life that I'm not going to get back. Let's make this fun. There was a really lovely man. He passed away not that long ago, Anson Call, and he used to say, "It's not hard, but don't fuck it up." And I think that that's like a really lovely way to carry it, because like actually it is hard sometimes, but it's like, yeah, like just keep that light attitude, because you're going to have hard things happen on set. But if you're coming at it with a bad attitude, or you're a little too tense, or you almost kind of like want to make the photo assistant work too hard or whatever, um, it's just going to kill the vibe, as they might say.
It's
And
funny how fast morale on set can change over a
yeah,
minute of an argument or something, or some tension.
yeah,
Um,
totally. And when you think about smaller agency work, or just this smaller clients or whatever, there aren't that many people in the room. And how you carry yourself
mhm.
is going to end up being remembered. And the other part is, like, again, going back to customer service. If I'm the tech, or if I'm the photographer, ultimate form of customer service, I am absolutely in sales. I am selling the client, the agency, the actual client directly.
Yep.
I am making sure that you feel that I have brought all the players together, that we are all working together to get you what you're here for, and you're going to get your money's worth, right? And
Mhm.
that attitude should kind of go down the line. If my tech, they're selling me, they're like, hey man, I've got you. I know what we're looking for. If there's a mistake, I'm going to catch it. We're good.
Yep.
My lead assistant, they're going to say, yeah, I know how you want to light this. I'm going to start setting it up, and you tell me where you want to get it dialed in. Oh, is your head touching the ground? Let me get a sandbag to slide under there. It's that's part of the
Yeah.
experience.
So,
And similarly, when you're working with smaller, or well, not similarly, when you're working with smaller groups, and it's like I was saying earlier, if you're a small budget, it feels like it's really your money. It's not the company's money. It's like, whoa, like we're going to give this to this person and we're not going to get it back. Well, what I
yeah.
want to give you back is exactly what you wanted, and maybe a bit more. And I want to create an experience for you that feels elevated, that feels special, that you don't just say like, we got our photos of whatever, fountain pens, amazing. But also, like, what a treat working with Dylan and Peter. They were just great. And Peter, because of, apps like VeryBusy, we were able to like seamlessly get through, it's like those are those value added things, right? And I think when you think about how you separate yourself, it's not that you make incredibly different work. It might just be that you carry yourself with a really like you're light. You have gratitude. You're gracious. You're thoughtful. You're trying to pay attention to all the players. You're making sure you're talking to people, and you're being present because for some of those clients, this is the first time they've ever had a photo shoot,
Right. Right.
or this is the first time they've ever spent this much money. This is the first time they've ever had commercial retouching, or every time they've ever done a job, we always just send a stupid PDF around and it's really annoying and somebody loses it. Well, and then I say, hey, have you used, to tie it in, it's like, have you used VeryBusy? I'm just going to send this to you. It's going to be super easy. We're going to go right from the shoot and we're going to make notes right there.
Yeah.
Those are the differentiating factors. When you think about what's trending, it's not always what you can do. You don't always have to pull a rabbit out of your hat, but you do need to say like, well, what's trending in technology? What's trending in adaptation? How do
Oh, yeah.
I stay relevant as a business? And it's like, okay, everybody's on their phone. Maybe I don't need to post something to Instagram, but maybe I need to use a mobile friendly app, or maybe I need to use, like
Totally.
thinking about these tools.
Well, the whole value added thing is, I mean, yeah, we have the creative side of your business, but more so than in a lot of times, it takes up even more times the production and the business side of things. If you can deliver them, if they're hiring you for a style and you're making it into their, the three bids they're asking for because of a treatment you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
But then you come in with a solid team, a solid, production plan with the tools needed to readily get your client to where they want to be on budget, on time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's value. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that can make beautiful work. I think it really narrows it down if you can really show that you can produce something like as a whole, right? You can
Exactly.
get the team together. You have the tools, you have the experience to know how to make things go smoothly. And then where you can make even, I mean, where the higher prices I think commend is, is when they start hiring you because they know you're going to do a good job, but it's like they're hiring you for when things don't go well, like when something unexpected comes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
They know you're the guy that can handle it.
Yeah,
And
and that's
that's
where
part of it.
that value comes in, where you like,
Mm-hmm.
um, I can think of someone that I will not name, but they would always send in their estimates, and they were always sometimes like 50% higher than the other competitor that they were up against. And the client would be like, "What are you're what?" And they were big clients, and
Mm-hmm.
they were like, "Well, yeah, because that's what it really costs to give you exactly what it is that you want." Because I'm
Yeah.
not just gonna, if you want to shoot stills and video, then we're gonna have a whole second crew, and that's what it's going to cost. You want me to flip my camera to video mode? Yeah. And I mean, now
I mean, yeah.
that's maybe a different conversation, but it just in terms of like, know that the job, no matter what, the job is going to get shot, whether it's by you or somebody else. So start with that gratitude, and then find out how you show those differentiating factors for why it was such a great choice to work with you.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, on that point too, I always land on the fact that I feel like honesty wins and being upfront fast. Like you said, submitting an estimate that is true to what, I mean, not trying to fit what they want into a certain price, but giving a price that will fit what they actually want.
Mm-hmm.
Or when it comes to a client comes to you with with a project and they list out their specs and what they're going to do, but you maybe see a better way to do it and being open enough to let them know this. I feel like better things have come from being upfront with a client, even if it's maybe a change in something or this or offering up a new perspective, even if they don't go with it. I feel, from my experience at least, and I'm interested if you have experience with this, it ends up on the right side of things. At least they know that they're working with somebody who's going to tell them an honest answer, how it is, be true to them, and is on board with trying to get them what they actually want, and is not just there for a quick turn kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I think that, to your point, honesty does win out every time, and that includes being forthright with what's achievable. And I think it's the same sort of thing of like, well, look, this is how much you actually have in the budget. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Given the scope of what you're asking for and given the budget and trying to think about the stakeholders, I think we can actually get 15 shots done, not 20.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to get more out of what those 15 are. And maybe we should talk about, is there an opportunity for us to recrop certain images where you can kind of squeeze a bit more out of, like, oh, well, you could get this little vertical moment for your feed and you could do this for a banner and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's like, those are creative, real solutions based on prior experience and real information.
Exactly.
And now it's like, you want somebody to tell you what you want? That's easy. You can find a bunch of people that are going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they can actually do it, something else entirely. And like it's like, then you're like, oh, no, this isn't actually a disappointment. This person's just telling me what's actually achievable based on the quality that I'm expecting.
The quality, that's key there too, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, okay, if you want to have an event, and you want to do it tomorrow, it's like, well, we're only going to have so many options. If you wanted to do that event in Central Park, we're going to have to book that out a couple of years in advance. And I just have to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you it's possible. It's like, it's like, you have to manage expectations of what's really achievable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, man, we're coming to an end here. And like usual, we don't have enough time to talk about everything we want to.
Sorry.
So I think you need to come back again and we can
chat
more about all this stuff. Maybe we'll just start recording our texts and our phone calls and we'll just
we should not do that, but that would be kind of funny. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And, clearly there is a lot of meat on this bone and there are a lot of perspectives to be had. I think that this whole series has just been really fun to see. Well, on the technical side, and then also just, what's the temperature outside right now? What's this really feel for the people that are working in it?
And and I bet there's so much variation and there's so many different people and perspectives, and we'd want to hear it as well.
Yeah.
Dylan, thanks for being on. You are, I feel, one of the most talented photographers I know. It's a pleasure to be your friend, and I have to say I was a little upset when you moved to New York because I couldn't see you so much anymore, but you get to come on here and talk with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where are you at these days? Where can people find you on socials or websites?
Oh yeah, you can find me on Instagram at the good Dylan. And my website is dylanjamesnelson.com, and it's DYLAN, like Bob. Peter, thank you. That's a very generous and flattering thing to say. I appreciate it.
Go check out his work. You'll love it.
I got to update my website and post more on Instagram, just like everybody else.
There we go.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening, guys. Again, we actually have a 30-day free trial for VeryBusy.io going on right now. And actually next week, we are actually releasing a new update for no account collaboration. So you'll be able to send direct links to your clients without them needing to make a VeryBusy.io account. They can just open the link and start collaborating with you. Simple, easy, even more frictionless. So jump on there, give it a try. Next week, we'll have that release. We'll send out we'll post about it too. This is the updates and when it goes live. So thanks for listening, and we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks, Dylan.
All right. Bye.